My name is Carol Peters, and I'm proud to serve United Way Next as President and CEO. I'd like to just take a moment and thank Caitlin Guest, who is my team member, and she's on the screen. She helps us with all of our events, making sure that they are seamless and move forward without any hiccups. So great to see all of you. I am pleased today to introduce our board chair, Ed Rivera, who is a former CEO at United Way of North Central New Mexico, and turn it over to Ed for a welcome before we kick off our United Way Town Hall. So thanks, Ed, for leading this.
Sure. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much, Carol. And I join you in thanking your team, your staff. Caitlin's with us today for all the background work that you do to make these programs possible and successful. So thank you for that. And I'll add my welcome to all members. I see many continuing members and many new members that have joined us recently. Thank you for your support of United Way Next. We very much appreciate it. For today, let me just do a little retrospective and ask you to join me at least as you've traveled your journey. I don't remember too many days in the field not talking we're thinking about revenue diversification and how we grow that to support the important work of United Way. Over the years, that model has evolved, and fortunately, I think the United Way system has really done a great job of bringing those two conversations together over the years. And so I'm really thrilled that we have two leaders of United Way Worldwide with us today to talk about where that is today, particularly in light of the very exciting model that United Way Worldwide has been promoting and been actively helping United Ways become successful in, and that is the thriving United Way. And so with that quick background comment from me, I have the pleasure of introducing Alice Archabal and Maureen Grant Hayes. Alice is the Chief Development Officer for the United Way Worldwide, and Maureen has a very exciting title. She's Vice President for Major Individual and Transformational Giving. And so Alice and Maureen, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ed. Hi, everyone. It's such a joy to be with you. And just a little side note, Ed and I go back many, many years. We knew each other in the early years when I started my fundraising career. And Ed helped to place me in one of my early fundraising jobs. So Ed, it's great to be back with you again and to see you. Hi, everyone. Maureen and I are super excited to be with you today to give you a brief overview of our work around revenue diversification and how we're working with the network to diversify fundraising across the network. Before we dive in, though, we're going to split the presentation into kind of half. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came about the strategy and how we developed our revenue diversification strategy, and then turn it over to Maureen to talk more about our pilots and what's next in our revenue diversification journey. But we thought it'd be nice to introduce ourselves and provide a little bit of our background. As Ed said, I'm the Chief Development Officer for United Way Worldwide. I've been with the network for just over 2 years, and I have to say it's been a fantastic journey to be able to dive into this work in partnership with the network to really think about how can we adapt to the ever-changing world of philanthropy and begin to diversify our revenue at scale. And I think you'll see in the presentation, a lot of the local United Ways are already doing this. It's super exciting to see the great work happening out in the network. And our role at the Worldwide office is how can we take some of those practices and start to scale those. I came to United Way Worldwide via a long career with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I always say I started at St. Jude and learned a lot. I moved on to Feeding America at a time when they were going through their transformation from America's Second Harvest to Feeding America, where I was the Chief Development Officer, and where we really changed and transformed our fundraising to scale a lot of our efforts and to really grow fundraising for the network. and put a face on hunger in America as well, really moving the network from a food distribution network to the largest domestic hunger relief organization. I then went on to Children's Memorial Hospital, that soon became Lurie Children's Hospital, and served as their senior vice president during a time when we launched our campaign to build the brand new children's hospital. We raised over $600 million in support of that campaign. And then I headed up to Milwaukee to Froedtert and the Medical College, which is the academic medical center, where I served as the chief development officer there as well, and worked very similar, kind of transformed. Froedtert Hospital had their own fundraising. The Medical College of Wisconsin had their own fundraising. And both CEOs of the institution saw a real opportunity to merge the fundraising teams. And we launched a $200 million campaign that grew to a $300 million campaign, which then I went back to St. Jude, which then led me here to United Way Worldwide under the leadership of Angela, knowing the important work that had to be done in order to transform our fundraising and think about new ways to diversify revenue. So it's been a joy and quite a journey, and excited to share where we're at today. I'll turn it over to what I like to say. Maureen is my colleague, my friend, and really my partner in crime in a lot of this work. She has worked tirelessly alongside many of our network partners to help stand up this work. So Maureen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. It's so fun to be on this call today and seeing people that I've seen recently and people that I know that I haven't seen for years. So it's a real delight to see such a mix of people and reconnect. I started my journey with United Way in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. And like probably many people on this call, did workplace campaigning for a couple of years and really enjoyed that. And then really my career grew as our United Way grew. So we started putting a real emphasis on leadership giving. And I built up that program with a team over years. And then we really put a hard push on major gifts and really catapulted that work forward. And then as natural progression of that, really started building out our planned giving program and then getting into some very significant principal gifts. So I know I crossed paths with a number of people on this call about framing your impact strategies for investment and different areas of work that really, really made a difference with United Way in Calgary to really move us forward, both in terms of the impact that we were having in the community, making sure we've connected in all the key partnerships in the city, and really moving into those multi-year principal gifts going forward. And during that time, I see Ann Fox and a few others, I had the opportunity to do some volunteering with United Way Worldwide and being on some of the volunteer groups. And ultimately 9 years ago, that led to United Way Worldwide reaching out. And I connected with my good friends, Ed and Joyce, and United Way extended me an invitation to come and work at United Way Worldwide and move down to the US. So it was an exciting time. Of course, it always is, moving to a different country and taking on work at a global level. But it's just been an incredible journey here at United Way Worldwide, getting to do work on a global basis, getting to learn about philanthropy around the world and what drives donors. And the last 2 years, really taking a leadership role on this revenue diversification work with Alice, culminating to what some of what you'll hear from us today. And of particular excitement for us right now is the pilots that we're undertaking. So thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today.
Great. Thank you, Maureen. So as I shared, what we would love to cover with you today is first, what led us on this journey for revenue diversification and why this is such a key initiative now, and why it's so important. And then to dive into some of the research we did on how the network is diversifying, what we saw through that research, not only from the network, but also, as I like to call our sister charities, some of our other peer organizations who have also been on this revenue diversification, that really helped us inform the strategy of how we were advancing this work. And then lastly, how we're thinking about this work and launching pilots to begin to scale some of these strategies across the network. And Maureen's going to talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, when I came to United Way Worldwide just over 2 years ago, as I kind of looked at the first 90 days and acclimated myself to the work that the network was doing and some of the historical data of some of the trends and what we were seeing and speaking to local United Ways, it became very clear in the leadership team that I work with in the development, in our development office, really kind of focused on these, what we would call our strategic imperatives of how we were thinking about the work moving forward. We knew that there was a real need to diversify, not only at Worldwide, but also across the network as we began to think about where the opportunity was in fundraising. But we also saw that there was a real opportunity of, based on what was happening with workplace, how do we really think about creating a sustainable model that could help the network grow? So it wasn't just what I say transactional, and it wasn't just about revenue, but we were really deepening donor engagement and developing sustainable pipelines moving forward. We also knew that this work had to be done in collaboration and in partnership with the network and with some donors too, to ensure that we were being really integrated, listening to what was happening in the network, hearing from our donors, and that this could not be a top-down approach, that it had to be a very integrated approach with our network partners, our donors, as well as the Worldwide team. We also paid close attention to being donor-focused and audience-focused, so that as we were engaging in building strategies, we knew that it had to take into consideration how we were putting the donor first and really deepening the engagement and listening to the donor. And then lastly, this whole notion about how could we do this to scale, not only from a revenue standpoint, but also from an efficiency standpoint. Next slide, please. So with all of that, as we kicked off the work, I think what really excites me, and Carol made mention of this too, revenue diversification now is a part of that Thriving United Way framework. It is a key initiative across the entire network in terms of how we will build a thriving network. We know diversifying revenue is really, really key. But I think what's also really exciting too, this revenue diversification isn't only about the diversifying revenue. How we're creating this, it also really leans into this notion of network citizenship. You'll hear later on about these pilots, and we have so many network partners participating in the pilots, which really is a testament of how the network is working together to really grow and develop this revenue diversification, which is super exciting for all of us to see us come together to really show up as one network to really, really figure out this revenue diversification. Next slide, please. So why is this so important? Next slide. I mean, I think you all have seen this slide or a version of this slide. We know the story of what's happened over the course of probably the last 10 years, and we've seen steep decline in our revenues because of the workplace campaign and the shifts in what's happening in terms of technology replacing the role that United Way played with these third-party groups like Benevity, who are creating these technology solutions to make it a little bit easier for workplace campaigns to be executed and allow employees to choose where they want to go, and a lot of the companies moving to those third-party platforms. And what that is resulting in is not only, and this goes back to the sustainability, not only the revenue decline, but the donor decline. And when we see that donor decline without what I like to say, a feeder system of more donors coming into the pipeline, we're not going to see the sustainability that we all need to continue to our second century of service, which is so critical to our communities. So we know because of the donor decline and the revenue decline, we have to do something to address this. Next slide, please. So I always like to share this slide as well, because I think with the donor and the revenue decline, we're also seeing that United Way is becoming less of a pass-through organization. And we're seeing, we're seeing the resources under management, especially during the COVID years, increase, which is something you'll see, which is a point of part of the strategy as we think about United Way's opportunity and the network's opportunity to demonstrate the impact that we have in local communities and why those resources under management and our ability to share that story with our donors so that they clearly understand United Way's value and impact that they're having in communities will really drive some of the success we have through this revenue diversification strategy. Next slide, please. So what we did is we knew we wanted to diversify, but we wanted to figure out how should we diversify? What's happening out there? So we undertook a pretty extensive research project with our partners at CCS Fundraising, where we took the DB2 data, really dove into it to look at what's happening across the network, what network members are successful in diversifying their revenue, and what are we seeing with that. So we really then took that, we called out some of the brightest, I would say. We know there's a lot happening across the network, but honed in on about 30 to 40 local United Ways. And we were really kind of prescriptive about it. We didn't want to do just the big United Ways or the urban United Ways. We wanted to look at, small, medium, and large market United Ways geographically. What were some of those key indicators and what were they learning in their revenue diversification and what was working that could help to inform those strategies? We also then, as I mentioned, surveyed 5 of our non-federated nonprofit peers to see what they were doing as well and put all this data together to begin to highlight what was working and what we were seeing across the board. Next slide, please. Next slide. So a couple of things here that we saw. And this wasn't just a COVID thing. What we were really seeing is many of the network members were capturing and going to some were direct service and capturing some government grants and then utilizing those to inspire foundations to also support them in that work, as well as we were seeing some bright spots with individual giving and the ways that local United Ways were moving to building a much more deeper relationship with their individual donors on the file, shifting from just a workplace kind of thought process to a deeper engagement at that level. We saw that, again, this foundation revenue was really a bright spot where some significant gains were happening at the network level through capturing grants from either regional foundations or national foundations that were supporting them in their local community. We also, to that point, saw a lot of spike from COVID fundraising, not from just government, but from also individuals, which also demonstrated that individuals really understood the role United Way played in times of crisis, or what we would say disaster, and really showed up and supported those local United Ways as well. Next slide, please. So where that really kind of put our key findings together, we know that with over 45,000 corporate partners that our local United Ways are working with every single day, we have to continue to grow and develop those relationships, because they are what we would say, like, our strength of what United Way has are those rich corporate partnerships. But we know that there's an opportunity to diversify those partnerships and really take a different approach of not just approaching them from an employee engagement, but building out what we would call a multifaceted approach. We also saw that by leading with impact and securing larger grants through foundations, and understanding that maybe the smaller local United Ways may need to come along and be a part of more of a collaborative fundraising approach, or even from a state approach or a regional approach, we have a real opportunity, knowing in the foundation space that they're very interested in bringing and scaling fundraising or support and impact at a state or regional level, and a real opportunity to collaborate in our foundation space. And then this notion about government grants, how we can really leverage United Way. And I think you've seen this already with the recent announcement of the GGRF grant, that United Way, because of our work and what we did during COVID, has a real opportunity to leverage more of those government grant opportunities to serve as the community convener, engagement, partner to help get government dollars out or engage the local community in whatever that government or again, like the GGRF, the work entails because of United Way's local positioning in market. And then, of course, growing individual giving. We know that 80% of giving comes from individuals. And in order to do this, a real opportunity to think beyond workplace as our sole acquisition strategy, and to really think about new ways to acquire, retain, and grow individuals so that we build sustaining pipelines locally. And then lastly, we know all of this work cannot be done without what we call enablers. We must support and continue to support a robust training agenda, both at the worldwide level, but also how we can activate at the state level or even the regional level, more cohorts to help support that work and each other, as well as data as a real key driver in this revenue diversification. During the research, we really found that several local United Ways still struggled on how they were capturing donor information, how they were segmenting it. So how can we help to strengthen the data on donors at the local level so that then they can really deeply engage donors and understand and be, what I had said before, really donor focused in their journeys with United Way. Next slide, please. So this is, because there is so much to do, we really took kind of like a prioritization of how we think about this. And it really involves what we would say a lot of moving parts that help us reach those desired results. So the first thing we really wanted to focus on is how we begin to scale corporate, foundation, and government grants. Because if we can start to really focus in on that, it will allow us to begin then to build out the individual giving and to be able to tell the story of how United Way is activating some of these revenue channels, how we are leading with impact, what we are doing that will deepen the engagement with our individuals that will then create this more sustainable revenue mix. Next slide, please. So the way we want to do this is really building on our strengths as a network and as one network. And so how we really thought about this is by leaning into our strengths. And we see that these philanthropic patterns that create opportunities for United Way is really going to be what helps us be successful with this revenue diversification. And starting, as I mentioned before, with, the corporate base support, and with the 45,000 corporate partners that we have. Also how we are an expansive community network. There's no one else like United Way. And that is something that is a differentiator for us to talk about with donors and what we're able to do in community because of our broad impact and how we show up in community is like no other organization. And then lastly, this ability for us to scale as a network is really what I think is our opportunity to be able to go to large scale funders to talk about the work that's happening locally and how we can scale that to continue to serve our communities both locally and globally. And then you couple that with the local United Way strengths, and no one knows communities like our local United Ways. No one has the expertise like our local United Ways. And we saw this during COVID. I don't think there's any other organization out there who can be so agile and respond in a crisis or during a community need like United Way, because of the deep-rooted partnerships and relationships that they have at the local level. So that's really how we then think about what we can do as a network to really stabilize the fundraising, deepen and diversify these existing relationships, and build a much more broader base of support. So that's why we get so excited about this revenue diversification, because we can really see what we can do as a network like no one else can. Next slide. So as we go deeper into each of the strategies, you'll see with corporate for our revenue diversification, it is about augmenting our workplace giving. It is not about going away from workplace giving. That is so critical. But what we do know is the more we have more of a deepened relationship with our corporate partners and have a much more what we call multifaceted approach to our corporate partners, not just leading with employee engagement, but leading with impact and engaging them in volunteer efforts, in grant opportunities, in cause marketing, and even just, skills-based volunteer. It's really going to allow us to have a much deeper relationship. And then we'll also see employee giving going up when they see the corporation is much more engaged with United Way. Our research is showing that. We're seeing that with some of our current campaigns. So a real effort to really develop a multifaceted approach to our national and global partners that will allow us to accelerate some of this work. Next slide, please. And then on the foundation side, it is, as I mentioned before, really leveraging these government partnerships to scale some of our foundation giving. And we're already seeing this with the GGRF grant that we received. We were able to capture a $1 million gift from a family foundation in support of this work to help us build capacity, both at the national office and out in the network to support this work. Family foundations and other foundations want to support organizations who are helping to get these government grants out. And it's a great way to marry the two strategies together to build capacity and to be able to do the work at the local level. And then lastly is to really focus in on what I would say is building a strong and sustainable individual donor pipeline that really is about building these multifaceted approaches to individuals, not just thinking about them from workplace, but building a much broader relationship with them so that they fall in love with United Way, leading with the impact that's happening at the local level, and really being really understanding the work that's happening at the local level. And you'll see we highlighted crisis donors, prior donors, but really this notion of when donors really have shown up like they did during COVID, how we start to convert these donors to be long-lasting donors. And as Maureen talked about, we want to take them through that mid-level, major, and then ultimately be leaving, a legacy gift to United Way. But that will require that we really treat the donor and help educate them and engage them more deeply in the work that's happening at the local level. And this also allows us to think about how we acquire donors outside of the workplace and thinking about new ways to capture donors through various campaigns and other engagement opportunities like events, like digital, online, and even direct mail that is still successful for many organizations. Next slide. So, and then lastly, as I mentioned around data, and then the existing learning hubs, and then also impact reporting. I can't stress enough that what we saw in the research from local United Ways were those who were leading with impact data, utilizing ALICE research or even 211 data, and telling the story of how their United Way was having impact and leading with those impact measures. They really saw a much larger engagement and giving from their donors across the board. So a real emphasis to working with local United Ways and sharing their story, talking about the impact that they're having, and really helping donors have a much better understanding of the work that's happening locally. Next slide, please. So with that, it's a lot of strategies, it's a lot of work, but where we want to go with it is with our pilots to begin to test and scale what we saw in the network. And now I'll turn it over to Maureen to talk more about the pilots and how we're launching this work.
Next slide. Next slide. Thanks, Alice. So once we had all this research and stuff, we thought we've really got to get moving to action quickly. We knew it was important. The network was pushing us as well. And we said, okay, let's take what we've learned within our research of United Ways that are diversifying and the other 5 federated nonprofit, and let's select some strategies that we think have the best likelihood of success. And we also kept in mind short-term revenue needs. So how do we show that we are gaining and growing revenue and donors along the way while we're also testing these longer strategies? So we took everything we found, we analyzed why it worked and where, and put together a generic work plan for 6 different pilots. And those are what we are going and testing. So we want to have a diverse group of local United Ways, test them, figure out what works, what doesn't work, how do we pivot quickly if something isn't working, and also get a good sense of where, in what markets does it work. So we are learning, we're going to revise, we're going to test, and we're going to continually move forward. And ultimately, we want to develop something that can be scalable, that can be not replicating what one United Way or 2 United Ways have done, but what together, as we learn from this pilot cohort, can we say has been the most effective way to implement these strategies. Next slide. So these are the 6 areas, and ultimately, they're all about driving donors and revenue. It's about using data to make sure that we're really, driving our fundraising strategies going forward, and the ability to communicate shared impact. So you'll see up here the 6 different pilots. 3 are more early revenue generators, and 3 are more enablers, data, training, collaborative work. So just picking on a few of these, we have an issue-based community campaign. So we know there has been success when United Ways are doing short sprint campaigns that are very topic specific, and how to use that effectively to acquire new donors that they can then cultivate and work on to convert them ultimately to mission donors. But it's that idea of a specific issue that prospects might see themselves in when they don't necessarily see themselves in the big United Way yet, and really attract some new donors that way using social media, direct marketing, events, other things, and then having key community partners that can invest those dollars quickly. So it's this idea of an 8 to 12 week sprint campaign to really move something forward. The second one around data is really about what's that baseline data that's critical to move our revenue forward. So it's not about what platform you're on. It's about what is that key data that you need, a minimum viable amount of data to actually support your fundraising strategies. We know this is a real challenge in the network. And so irrespective of what platform, whether you're small, medium, large, how do we really start using the data we have and getting to those minimum standards? Donor and crisis. This was when you saw the blip of donors that United Way attracted during crises, whether it was COVID, man-made disasters, fires, floods. We've seen it around the world where there is a real bump in the number of donors who provide support. What we haven't seen yet is success at maintaining those donors, keeping them engaged. So we're really going to be doing some testing there with some cities that have had man-made disasters, whether it's mass shootings, whether it's been fires or other crises. And then what's the strategy to keep those donors engaged? We're going to do some A/B testing. What do we think are effective strategies to convert them to mission donors? Is it easier to convert them to a community response fund type of approach? And so it's really about capturing and retaining some of those donors that came to United Way during a crisis and helping them continue support. We've got mid-level giving training. The crux of this one is we know we've got really good training that we offer for mid-level giving through Veritas, but we also see that many individuals who take that training go back to their local United Way and have difficulty implementing it, whether it's getting the right data, whether it's leadership support. And so this one will really be about what are the key augmented services around that individual that will make them successful once they've taken the training. Direct marketing is pretty self-explanatory. It's a collaborative approach, again, and align with the brand new brand refresh. And Alice touched on the collaborative fundraising. How do you get a group together with a state association as a backbone organization, really working together to apply for some large foundation gifts? And so there's success. We've got KPIs and indicators. So we really are focused on an evidence-based approach. But we're also being really smart that as we get going, if there's something that isn't working, we need to pivot, we need to change, even if it's stopping one of these pilots and moving forward in a different way. That's really the approach that we're taking to this work. But ultimately, we need data to drive revenue. We need to be able to communicate our impact and attract new donors. Next slide. So we put out a call to the global network to see who was interested in being on these pilots, and there were criteria that had to be met, general criteria across the board, and then specific criteria for each of the pilots. And you'll see on this slide how many we have recruited for each of the 6 pilots. There was so much demand. We knew we weren't going to be able to say yes to everyone, and we wanted to make sure that within that we had really good diversity in the pilot. So ultimately, we've got 65 local United Ways and 3 state associations that have agreed to participate with us across these 6 pilots. Next slide. And this just gives you a breakdown on the diversity in the pilots. We know that in order to be scalable, we had to make sure that we had small, mid-size, and large United Ways in each one of our pilots. We also knew we wanted a rural urban. We wanted you'll see on the left, we wanted American and global local United Ways. So we've got 5 from Canada and 4 others from outside North America. So we've got a lot of diversity by region, by countries. Then you see by region. And this helped us make sure that we've got East Coast, West Coast, urban and rural, and also by size. because we need to, as we go through these pilots, really start to look at what works where and how can we put together something that we know a small United Way could implement. Might be a different model for a mid, different model for a large, but we've got to make sure that we come out of this working with all our pilot cities to have resources, training, and work plans that we can get out into the network that will have the broadest application. So thank you. That's just a quick snapshot on the pilots. There is a lot more on United Way Online. There's a list of all the cities and greater descriptions for all the pilots, but just thought that we would share that snapshot with you to give you a sense of the work that we're taking on going forward. Back to you, Carol. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Alice and Maureen. This was great. We are going to open it up for Q&A, and there have been several people who have been connecting with me in the chat with questions. So I'm going to encourage folks, if you have feedback, thoughts, commentary, please don't hesitate to unmute. But I'm going to turn it over first to our incoming board chair, Paul DeBazio, who's on screen, for just a few comments, and then help us facilitate this next part.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Thanks, Alice. And my goodness, it's good to see you again. I think I probably am uniquely positioned on this call as a person who both sat in your seat as well as at the local United Way level. And so certainly good to see the continued work that United Way Worldwide is doing on supporting revenue growth through corporations, but also individuals. And this diversification strategy is something I think many United Ways have been thinking about, talking about, and it's great to see the leadership from United Way Worldwide in this area. So thank you for all you've been doing. And Maureen, of course, great to see you. Maureen was on my team while I was at United Way Worldwide, and as she noted, she came down from Canada. I think one of the best decisions I made was when they wanted to, I think it was the Canadian government or maybe the U.S. government wanted to send you back, and we fought to keep you in the U.S. And I'm glad you're still there. So great to see both of you and see the work that's being continued. Again, not just at United Way Worldwide, but on behalf of and in partnership with the network. So thank you both for that. My role is just really to facilitate any questions, right? I know there was a couple of items in the chat, and as Carol said, some of you were reaching out directly to her. But why don't we just, if you want to either raise the hand, I can see half the screen at a time. I'll toggle back and forth. But, raise your hand or speak up. I see the first Patrick Jinks I see with a question, two-part question, I guess, in the chat there. So Patrick, why don't you just unmute and share your thoughts and questions if you can.
Well, I put them in the chat box because I was told I wouldn't have to speak, Paul.
Oh, well.
What do you do? You put me on the spot.
You put a lot of words there. I didn't want to just read them, so.
I'm looking for, these are not related questions actually, but one, I just wondered if any of the research showed anything about any earned income. Are United Ways doing what some other nonprofits are doing in terms of any earned income as a creative revenue source? And then my second question is about, back in the day, we had Can Do, we had, Campaign 101 kind of training. If we are augmenting and not replacing workplace campaigning, what is the best in practice model today for workplace campaigning? Because that does continue to be, for many United Ways, still the largest source of revenue. So is there a Can Do like today's version of sort of packaged training that people like us who are working with local United Ways or that local United Ways can access through United Way Worldwide?
Patrick, I'll start with the earned income. I can tell you with our research, we kept it to philanthropy because we really wanted to focus the work and the revenue diversification around philanthropy. But I can tell you from an earned income perspective, what we're seeing, and this happened, gosh, I think two months ago, right, Maureen? We had a webinar on volunteerism, and I know a lot of local United Ways are using volunteerism as an earned income source for revenue in terms of creating volunteer projects for their corporations where they're capturing some earned income. There's also other models out there. I know from a worldwide perspective, we have this on the horizon for the future, but at this point, we're just thinking about the philanthropy standpoint. As for the workplace giving, yes, and yes, it's augment. And Maureen can talk a little bit about the training. There's a whole training component of how we're working with a training designer who's working with the local United Ways to capture some of this. So we're updating some of our training resources. Maureen, I don't know if you want to speak to this at all in the Fundraising 101 and all the work that you and Tom Lowry's team has been doing.
Yeah, so as Alice said, we are rethinking the whole Fundraising 101. We're going to look at what are the other 5 key modules of training that are most relevant today that we're hearing from the network they need to go forward. And so we'll likely be moving away from maybe how we've done it traditionally, you know, sort of workplace, corporate, major gifts and that, to really talk about what does it mean in an integrated way. And then how do we start infusing the learnings from these pilots in it as well. And so we're looking at that over the course of 2024. We've already started to refresh the Fundraising 101. We're also thinking a lot about training delivery. So how is a self-serve model? How is it modularized so that it can be downloaded and done a particular way? How can we create some communities of practice so people have an opportunity to share with each other? So we're really thinking about both refresh content as well as refresh delivery methods.
Great. Thanks, Alice and Maureen, for that answer. I like back. I'm sorry, Dan, I missed your question a little bit earlier. Was what Metro United Ways are showing results in this model? So again, you have in the pilots different size United Ways, which is absolutely great to have that diversity there. But specifically from a larger United Way perspective, are there any using this model and showing some really results?
You know what? I can't speak to specific Metro ones. Maureen, I don't know if you remember any off the top of your head. I was just writing back to Daniel in the chat saying I'd love to get back to him. I think what we do see in the Metro ones, though, is this notion of leading with impact. And when they have some place-based approaches, others, I think about Dallas, they are having tremendous success. I know that they've really focused in on this individual and major gift giving, as well as leveraging much larger corporate gifts around some of the funds, as well as leading with impact. They have really clear data of where they're demonstrating to donors, tied to a strategic plan of how they're making advancements for the Dallas community. As some of the examples. Maureen, I don't know if you have any off of the top of your head that you know of.
I don't. And just saying, as we were doing our initial research, we did look at DB2 data. So who was growing outside of workplace campaign over the last 3 years. That's the list we started with, but we then had to cull it down quickly in terms of small, medium, and large. So the 40 that we spoke to was a sampling. It's not necessarily those who did it the best, but it was a sampling across the board with that kind of diversity in it. So it had a mixture. It would have had a few larges in there, but I can't think off the top of my head who they would have been.
I'll give you one other, which I think has, and they're participating pretty significantly in the pilots, and that's Toronto. Toronto's really shown really a jump start on this revenue diversification. Probably they've been at it for probably 5 to 6 years, 7 years, I should even say. And they have a really kind of robust approach to it where they're building this individual giving pipeline, strong acquisition around individuals through direct mail and digital, and then growing their mid-level and major gift program. And they see their impact work. They're doing a lot of neighborhood work where they're showing up in neighborhoods and really doing collective impact within those neighborhoods.
Great, thank you. I see a hand up from Matt the camera, another former staff member at United Way Worldwide. So Matt, your question?
Yeah, hey Paul, hey everybody. Wonderful to be back and kind of plug in my UWW headset here for a few minutes. My quick question is, and thank you for that, extensive donor segmentation and strategy is an exciting, important approach. Question, toward what societal end, right? I often find donors are really interested if they know that there is, right, the mental health crisis, the housing crisis, poverty. It feels like there's an acuteness happening now with crises that are colliding. So what can donors count on from United Way? So it's maybe like, yes, all the science around the fundraising, but what is United Way as locals or as a network best prepared to really drive societal progress? Because I think at the end of the day, that's the best way to, generate repeat donors and big dollars. So just tossing that, because I know community impact, right, is always the toward what end, but I guess more specifically, is there a magnitude of progress that United Way can deliver against?
I think, Matt, it's such a great question. And I know there's a lot of work that's already being undertaken in terms of looking, because I think, every community looks a little bit different. Our United Ways are working differently in every community. But what is that stake that we can put in the ground together, even around the 4 impact areas, to say, how is United Way making that societal change? And I can tell you that the team, and Angela is very steeped in this work as well, too, is really taking a look at that to say, what is that? How do we say that? And going back to how we think about what does thriving communities look like?
Thanks, Alice.
Any other questions? I've got one if there isn't, but I want to let others weigh in. Don't see a hand up. So Maureen, I just wanted to follow up with one of your comments around the communities of practice, which I love that idea, right? You want to learn from these pilots, maybe create some communities of practice. And as I think about the different buckets of revenue diversification that you and Alice shared, I think about that growth, the slide you showed, the growth in the grants, right? That was the 23% up, right? Government grants. Do we know, which 10, 15, 20 United Ways are hitting it out of the park there? Can we learn from them? Has there been any sort of that community of practice around that particular piece? Because I see in our role here at United Way, next we talked to a lot of United Ways. They all say, well, who's doing it? We say this is what you should do. And they're like, well, who's doing it? So who is doing it? I love the idea of communities of practice. And that's one that jumps out because it's sort of one of those growth lines, right? For now, right? We're seeing that growth individuals, but also around that corporate, particularly government grant rather. So do you have a sense of the who's, who are the high performers in some of those? Have you pulled some of those groups together yet?
Not yet, but that's
Okay.
exactly what we'll be doing as we get local United Ways submit their self-assessments.
Okay, yeah.
On the Thriving United Way, they'll rate themselves on all these areas, on community impact work, diversifying revenue, and a number of success factors within there. What's going to be different than what Worldwide has done in the past as working with the network is that local United Ways are also rating themselves on a maturity level within it. So are they just dipping their toe? Are they just emerging into the foundation work? Or is it a strength of their organization and they're really growing? Or are they thriving at that work? And so then we'll start saying, okay, how do we help United Ways move themselves along that maturity model? So we really want to rethink our training and resources and everything and anchor them around how do you get from emerging to growing and growing to thriving? But I think what's going to be interesting on the communities of practice is then there is also an opportunity. If you have a bunch of United Ways that are at an early stage in one of the success factors, we'll start forming communities of practice. So you'll then start having those that are at a similar place and looking to grow. And so it's a more, I would say, sort of methodical way of bringing groups together who might be at the same point and are looking to all get together, and grow on that journey of maturity.
Yeah, that's great. I think it also, what it does or allows is you accelerate that learning curve, right? And that's really what you're trying to do in that. So I love that. Applaud you on that side as well. I know we're at 2:57 on the East Coast here, Carol, so we got a couple of minutes left.
I see a hand by Dick Aft.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What's he doing there? Is Dick okay? Hi, Dick. Yes. You're on mute. So if you unmute.
I did had to find the button. Hi, everybody. Just a curiosity, as we look more to grants, as a source of income, that certainly will increase our money under management. Will we continue to differentiate fundraising from money under management?
I want to make sure I understand your question, Dick, because when I think about money under management, do you mean resources under management, the RUM money?
Yes,
I think he does.
I
Yeah.
don't want to confuse people in our communities about fundraising campaigns by
Yeah.
adding grant income to the campaign.
Yeah, no, I don't think we'll see grant income being added to the campaign whatsoever. I think if communities are still doing their local campaigns, the grants would be separate from those campaigns. So that then we're truly talking about fundraising and community engagement, separately from the grants.
Good. Thank you.
Yep.
Right. So I know we're in our final 2 minutes. I again want to say thanks to Alice and Maureen for sharing, the thought process, the data that put together the strategies, so it's data driven and the pilot's the next step that you all are embarking on. I think that's great for all of us to hear and see. Carol, I'll turn it back to you to help close out the session.
All right, great. Thanks, Paul. Well, thanks to Maureen and Alice and to Ed and Paul for helping us with today's session. We're so grateful for the information, as well as the opportunity to see so many of you join us for this rich conversation. I do want to take a moment and invite you, extend the invitation to our upcoming Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Roundtable that will happen on Monday, June 17th. And Caitlin is going to put the information in the chat so that if you are interested in that session, you can register. We have Jason Daniels, one of our United Way Next members, who will be the guest speaker talking around belongingness. We have several other sessions that you can find on our website at unitedwaynext.org, so don't hesitate to go out and look for that. And then if there's any information that you're looking for from today's session, know that Caitlin does send out a follow-up email. It will come early next week with the recording link so that you have access to go back and listen to anything that you may have missed. For those of you who didn't join today, but you're listening to this later, we're sorry you missed it. It was a great opportunity. And then the only question I have for Alice and Maureen, because others have asked about it, would you be sharing these slides? Are we able to share the slides from today with the group? And if that's okay, we will do so next week. And if not, we understand. So if you can just confirm that.
I think it's fine if we share the slides, right, Maureen?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. And then we also want to make sure there was a question in the chat for Maureen and Alice from Marnie Foster at Central Illinois, extending an invitation for you to virtually present to the United Way of Illinois. So I just want to put that on your radar, ladies, that she was asking about that, but it wasn't a formal question. So to everyone else, thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event. And have a great rest of your day.